What is the price of a hero's honor? In a Brooklyn courtroom, the answer was $7 and a cheap teddy bear. A homeless man stood trial for petty theft, but the judge presiding over the case was about to discover that he didn't just owe this man justice. He owed him his son's life. This isn't just a story you watch. It's a debt of honor you feel. Stay with us and witness the moment one man's forgotten past brought an entire courtroom to its feet in stunning silence. It was a place where justice was dispensed not with a clarion call, but with the dull thud of a rubber stamp. On this frigid November morning, case number 88-3-12 was just another line item on a long docket. Another ghost to be processed through the system. Your Honor, the defendant is Samuel David Johns, the young prosecutor announced, his voice crisp with the unearned confidence of someone who had never faced a decision more life-altering than what to order for lunch. The charge is petty theft. The people recommend time served and a probationary period. He has no fixed address, no means of payment for a fine. All eyes, for a brief, disinterested moment, turned to the defendant. Samuel Johns was less a man and more a collection of weathered apologies. His frame was skeletal, swallowed by a threadbare army field jacket that had seen better wars. A tangled silver beard hid a jawline clenched tight against the world, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. He was a ghost in his own life, a silent testament to gravity's relentless pull. To everyone in the room, the bored bailiff, the hurried public defender, the cynical court reporter, he was just another piece of human debris washed up on the shores of the justice system. An inconvenience to be dealt with before the lunch break. But this man's story wasn't about what he had taken. It was about everything that had been taken from him. It was a story of a promise broken, a nation's debt unpaid, and a hero's honor left to rust in the gutters of the city he had sworn to protect. This isn't just another case file. This is a reckoning. And if you believe that our heroes should be honored, not forgotten, then do me a favor and hit that like button right now. Stay with us, because what happened next in that silent courtroom would shake its very foundations. To understand the silence that would soon fall, you have to understand the noise that once defined Samuel Johns's life. He wasn't born a ghost. He was forged in fire. On the battlefields of Ramadi, Iraq, they didn't call him Samuel. They called him Doc. As a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne, he was known as the Angel of Alpha Company. His hands, now trembling slightly as they rested on the defense table, were once instruments of miracles under fire. They were hands that could find a pulse in the chaos of an IED blast, hands that could pack a wound while whispering words of calm into the ear of a terrified 19-year-old from Ohio. He moved through firefights not with the swagger of a warrior, but with the focused grace of a guardian. His mission wasn't to take lives, it was to save them. He earned a Silver Star when he shielded a fallen Marine with his own body while restarting the man's heart. The rhythm of his compressions, a desperate prayer against the thunder of machine gun fire. He was the man you prayed for when all hope was lost. But the wars on the battlefield were nothing compared to the one he would fight at home. After his honorable discharge, he returned not to a parade, but to a quiet house and a new enemy, an insidious disease that was slowly stealing his daughter, Lily. A rare form of juvenile cancer. Samuel, the man who could defy death in a war zone, was now helpless. He threw himself into this new fight with the same ferocious dedication. He battled the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Veterans Affairs Administration, fighting for a trial drug, an experimental treatment that was Lily's only hope. He filled out forms in triplicate, sat on hold for hours, pleaded with indifferent clerks whose power lay in their ability to say no. He was a hero reduced to a beggar, fighting a war of paperwork and procedure. The system he had served, the system he had bled for, responded with agonizing slowness. "It's in committee," they'd say. "We're waiting for approval." These things take time. But Lily didn't have time. The approval for the drug came through on a Tuesday. Lily had passed away on Sunday. With her last breath, the light in Samuel's world went out. The system hadn't just failed him, it had betrayed him. It had stolen the one life he couldn't save. Faith, once the bedrock of his existence, crumbled into dust. He couldn't look at the flag without seeing the cold, sterile hallways of the VA hospital. He couldn't hear, "Thank you for your service," without the bitter taste of hypocrisy in his mouth. So he performed one last act of surrender. He walked away. He walked away from the pension he was owed, from the medals gathering dust in a drawer, from the friends who didn't know how to reach him, and from the identity of Samuel Johns, the hero. He chose the anonymity of the streets, where the only thing expected of you was to be invisible. Which brought him here to this cold morning, his invisibility about to be shattered. The inciting incident wasn't a grand gesture. It was a moment of profound, heartbreaking empathy. He was huddled in the doorway of a pharmacy, trying to escape the biting wind, when he saw a young mother trying to comfort a small child racked with a terrible, croupy cough. The mother's face was a mask of worry and exhaustion. The child's gasps for air were a sound that echoed in the hollows of Samuel's memory, the ghost of his own daughter's labored breathing. He watched them go into the store. A few minutes later, he followed. He didn't steal bread. He didn't steal for himself. His hands, the same hands that had saved soldiers, slipped a small bottle of children's cough syrup and a little plush teddy bear, the kind Lily used to clutch, into the cavernous pocket of his jacket. He was caught before he even made it out the door. The store manager, a man weary of shoplifters, called the police without a second thought. Now, Samuel stood before the bench, the stolen items on the evidence table, a bizarre testament to his crime. A $7 bottle of medicine and a $5 stuffed animal. He was the ghost in the machine of justice, waiting to be exorcised. The judge, the Honorable David Clark, cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the file. He was a man known for his efficiency and his stern demeanor, a man who saw the law in black and white. "Mr. Johns," he began, his tone formal, "this file indicates a prior service record. Can you confirm your name and service number for the court?" The public defender nudged his client. Samuel looked up, his eyes meeting the judge's for the first time. He recited the information in a low, rough voice, a string of words and numbers that once meant everything and now meant nothing. Samuel David Johns, service number 3-4-5-8821, 82nd Airborne Division, combat medic. A flicker of something, recognition, confusion, crossed Judge Clark's face. He leaned forward, peering at the man before him, then back down at the file. He read the name again, silently this time, his lips barely moving. The courtroom, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, grew quiet. The bailiff stopped checking his watch. The prosecutor frowned, puzzled. Judge Clark's hand, holding the file, began to tremble, almost imperceptibly. He stared at the ghost before him, but he was seeing something else entirely. He was seeing a sun-scorched street in Ramadi. He was seeing smoke and fire and a young Marine captain bleeding out in the dust. Slowly, deliberately, in an act that defied all courtroom protocol, Judge David Clark pushed his chair back and stood up. The scraping of the chair legs was the only sound in the dead-silent room. He didn't bang his gavel. He didn't say a word. He just stood, his tall frame ramrod straight, his eyes locked on the homeless man who had just stolen cough syrup. A silent, stunning tribute that no one else understood. After a long, breathless moment, he found his voice, though it was now thick with an emotion no one in his court had ever heard. "This court," he rasped, "will take a 15-minute recess." He turned and walked, almost fled, into his chambers, leaving behind a room buzzing with confusion and a mystery that was about to change everything. The heavy oak door of the judge's chambers clicked shut, sealing out the bewildered whispers of the courtroom. But for the Honorable David Clark, the noise was all on the inside. He bypassed his mahogany desk, his law books, his ordered life, and went straight to a small locked credenza in the corner. His hands, which had been so steady just moments before, fumbled with the key. Inside was not a bottle of scotch or a hidden indulgence, but a single wooden box, polished smooth by time and touch. He lifted the lid. There, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, lay a purple heart medal. Next to it was a photograph, its corners softened with age. It showed a much younger man in Marine Corps dress blues, a man with David Clark's eyes but a warrior's posture. His son, Captain Michael Clark. The judge wasn't a veteran himself. He had built a life of logic, law, and precedent, a world away from the chaos of combat. His son, however, had chosen a different path. And that path, on a dusty, blood-soaked afternoon in 2007, had intersected with that of the ghost now standing trial in his courtroom. Judge Clark didn't need to check a database. He didn't need to call a friend at the Pentagon. He knew that service number, that name, that division. They were seared into his memory, the coordinates of the day his world almost ended, the day he received the call that his son had been critically wounded in an ambush in Ramadi, the day the doctors told him that Michael had only survived the initial firefight and the perilous journey to the field hospital because of the actions of one man, a combat medic, a man they called Doc, a man named Johns. He reached for the phone, his fingers dialing a number he knew by heart. It was a secure line. On the other end, his son, now Colonel Michael Clark, stationed at the Pentagon, answered. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Michael," Judge Clark said, his voice strained. "I found him, the medic from Ramadi. I found him." Silence stretched across the line, heavy with shared memory. Then, the colonel's voice, tight and controlled. "Where is he?" "In my courtroom," the judge replied, the absurdity of the words hitting him like a physical blow. "He's homeless. He was arrested for stealing cough syrup." To understand the weight of that moment, you have to go back to that hellish afternoon in Ramadi. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughterhouse. Captain Michael Clark's platoon was pinned down in a narrow alley, a kill zone. An RPG struck their lead vehicle, and shrapnel tore through Michael's leg and side. He was down, bleeding out, the world turning into a gray, buzzing tunnel. His men were trapped, their radio operator dead. It was over. Then, through the smoke and the hailstorm of bullets, a figure emerged, moving with an impossible calm. It was Samuel Doc Johns. He wasn't running, he was gliding, a ghost in the chaos, his medical bag slapping against his side. He reached Michael, ignoring the bullets kicking up dust around him. His hands were a blur of motion, a tourniquet cinched tight on the leg, a pressure dressing packed into the wound in his side. He worked with a surgeon's precision in a butcher's environment. "Stay with me, Captain," he said, his voice a low anchor in the storm. "Your story ain't over yet." He stabilized Michael, then moved to two other wounded Marines, treating them with the same fierce focus. He dragged all 3 men, one by one, into the relative cover of a bombed-out storefront, all while laying down covering fire with his sidearm. He got on the radio of a fallen soldier and coordinated the medevac that would save all their lives. This kind of valor, this quiet, selfless heroism, is woven into the very fabric of American history. It often goes unseen, uncelebrated. It reminds me of the story of the 4 chaplains during World War II. In the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, after their transport ship, the SS Dorchester, was torpedoed, 4 Army chaplains, a Methodist minister, a Dutch Reformed minister, a Catholic priest, and a Jewish rabbi, moved through the chaos. They calmed the frightened men and handed out life jackets. When the life jackets ran out, they took off their own and gave them to 4 young soldiers. As the ship went down, survivors in the water looked back and saw the 4 chaplains, arms linked, praying together on the slanted deck. They chose certain death so that others might live. They didn't do it for a medal. They did it because their character, forged in faith and service, demanded it. Samuel Johns, in that alley in Ramadi, operated from that same place. It was a place beyond fear, beyond self-preservation. But when a man who lives by that code is broken by the very system he swore to protect, where does that honor go? It doesn't vanish. It just gets buried. Buried under grief, under disillusionment, under a threadbare army jacket on the cold streets of Brooklyn. Back in his chambers, Judge Clark was confirming this. He made another call, pulling strings, using the authority of his position to cut through the red tape that had strangled Samuel's life. He found the files, the misdiagnosed PTSD written off as adjustment disorder, the application for Lily's trial drug, lost in a system migration, the pension benefits, terminated due to a clerical error. It was a portrait of neglect, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each document was another nail in the coffin of Samuel's faith. The judge hung up the phone, his knuckles white. The anger he felt was cold and clean. It wasn't just about the man who had saved his son. It was about the promise a nation makes to its warriors, a promise that had been so casually, so cruelly broken. He knew he could no longer preside over this case. The personal connection made it an ethical impossibility. But that didn't mean he was powerless. The law had its rules, but justice had its demands. He would recuse himself. But first, he would set the stage. He would make sure that when court reconvened, it would not be a trial for a homeless man, but a testament to a forgotten hero. And he knew just who needed to be there to deliver it. When the courtroom doors reopened, the atmosphere had undergone a seismic shift. The listless indifference of the morning had been replaced by a crackling electric tension. The room was no longer empty. The back benches were now filled with men and women whose posture was a little too straight, whose gazes were a little too steady. They were veterans from the local VFW and American Legion posts, summoned by a quiet word-of-mouth network that moves faster than any newswire. They had come not knowing the full story, only that one of their own was in trouble. Samuel Johns was led back to the defense table, his eyes darting around the crowded room in confusion. His public defender was gone. In his place sat a sharp, silver-haired man in an expensive suit who introduced himself quietly as Martin Steele from the National Veterans Legal Consortium. "Someone asked us to look into your case, Mr. Johns," he said, offering no further explanation. Then the main doors opened again, and a hush fell over the room. Colonel Michael Clark, the judge's son, entered. He was the living embodiment of military authority, his Marine Corps dress blues, adorned with ribbons that told a story of service and sacrifice. He didn't speak to anyone, He simply took a seat in the front row, his back ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on the man who had saved his life. His presence alone was a thunderous testimony. Samuel saw him, and for the first time, a flicker of memory, of recognition, broke through the fog of his grief. The alley in Ramadi, the face of the young captain. It was all coming back, the power of a reunion, of seeing a ghost from a life you thought was long dead, can change the course of a life. Have you ever had a moment like that? A meeting that changed everything? Tell us about it in the comments below. These stories of connection are what remind us we're all in this together. A new judge, a woman with a reputation for fairness, took the bench, announcing that Judge Clark had recused himself due to a potential conflict. But David Clark remained in the room, standing quietly at the back. No longer a judge in a robe, but a father watching a debt of honor being paid. The proceedings began. The defense calls Colonel Michael Clark to the stand, Martin Steele announced. This was unorthodox, a character witness in a petty theft arraignment. But the new judge, sensing the gravity of the moment, simply nodded. Colonel Clark took the stand. He wasn't there to talk about Samuel's character in general terms. He was there to talk about a specific Tuesday in Iraq. In a clear, unwavering voice, he recounted the ambush. He described waking up in a haze of pain, certain he was going to die. And then, he said, his voice dropping slightly, I saw him. Doc Johns. He came through hell itself to get to me. He didn't just tell the story. He made the courtroom see it. He described the whine of ricochets, the smell of cordite, the desperate feeling of his life's blood soaking into the sand. He detailed how Samuel had ignored his own safety, how he had worked with impossible calm, how his presence had single-handedly turned the tide of that skirmish and saved not just his life, but the lives of his men. The man sitting at that table, Colonel Clark said, turning to look directly at Samuel, is the reason I have a wife and 2 children. He's the reason I can stand here today. He didn't just save my life, he saved my future. He then addressed the court, his voice ringing with authority. I have reviewed the after-action reports and his service record. This man is a decorated hero of the United States military. The fact that he is standing in this courtroom today, charged with stealing to survive, is not a failure of his character. It is a catastrophic failure of ours. A failure of the system we all represent. A heavy silence filled the room. The young prosecutor, who had earlier dismissed Samuel with a wave of his hand, rose to his feet. His face was pale. He had walked in that morning to clear a simple case, and now he was standing in the presence of undeniable heroism and profound injustice. He looked at Samuel, then at the colonel, and then at the rows of veterans watching him. He was no longer a prosecutor. He was a citizen confronted with a terrible truth. Your Honor, he began, his voice barely a whisper. The state is humbled. He took a deep breath. The state of New York moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Samuel Johns with extreme prejudice. So ordered, the judge said immediately. Then she did something extraordinary. She spoke directly to Samuel. Mr. Johns, on behalf of the judicial system, I want to offer you our deepest, most sincere apology. You were failed. We failed you. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. You are free to go. As Samuel stood, unsteady, the room erupted not in applause, but in a strange, solemn sound. It was the sound of dozens of men and women rising to their feet. The veterans in the back, the lawyers, the court staff, Colonel Clark in the front row. They all stood. It was a silent, rolling wave of respect, a spontaneous assembly of honor. Samuel Johns, the ghost who had been invisible for 15 years, was finally being seen. And as he stood there, his shoulders slowly straightening, a man from the back of the room, his face weathered and familiar, stepped forward. "Doc?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's me, Corporal Evans, from Alpha Company. We've been looking for you, man. We've all been looking for you." The courtroom's silent tribute was only the beginning. The moment the story hit the news wires, it transformed from a local human interest piece into a national firestorm. The image of the decorated colonel standing in deference to the homeless man he called a hero was a visual too powerful to ignore. News channels stopped calling Samuel Johns a vagrant and started using his proper title, Decorated War Hero. The narrative had been corrected, not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. The store owner who had pressed charges was one of the first to act. He appeared on local television, his face etched with shame. "I didn't see a hero," he confessed. "I saw a problem. I was wrong." He publicly apologized and donated his entire week's profits to a newly established fund for Samuel, a fund that, within 72 hours, swelled to over $500,000 from thousands of small donations across the country. The story had touched a nerve, a collective sense of guilt, and a deep-seated desire to make things right. The most significant change, however, happened away from the cameras. In Judge Clark's now quiet chambers, 3 men met: Samuel, the judge, and his son, the colonel. It wasn't a meeting of a victim and his saviors. It was a reunion of survivors, of men bound by a moment of extreme violence and grace. "You said my story wasn't over," Colonel Clark said to Samuel, his voice low. "You were right. But yours isn't over either, Doc." For the first time in years, Samuel spoke of Lily, of his grief, and of the crushing weight of his broken faith in the country he loved. Judge Clark didn't speak of the law. He spoke as a father who almost lost his son. He spoke of the debt that can never truly be repaid, but can be honored. "The system failed you, Samuel," the judge said. "It's a cold, imperfect machine. But the people in it, we have a chance to be better. You gave me my son back. Now, let us help you find your way back." This was the true turning point for Samuel. It wasn't the money or the public apology, it was the human connection, the recognition from the very people who represented the worlds of justice and military service that he felt had abandoned him. It was the restoration of his tribe. With this newfound support, Samuel didn't just cash the checks and retire. A man forged in the crucible of service doesn't know how to stop serving. He saw a new mission. With the help of the judge's legal expertise and the colonel's military network, he established the Angel Initiative. It was a brilliant, simple idea born from his own pain. The initiative partners retired combat medics and corpsmen, veterans with incredible skills, but often struggling with their own transition to civilian life, with at-risk youth in underserved communities. They don't just teach CPR and first aid, they teach discipline, grace under pressure, and the profound value of being the person who runs toward trouble to help someone else. He was turning his own trauma into a training ground for the next generation, ensuring that the instinct to save, which had defined his life, would live on. He was building a legacy, not from his heroism in the past, but from his purpose in the present. So as we leave the story of Samuel Johns, what is the ultimate lesson? It's not complicated. It's a truth forged in fire and remembered in silence. It reminds us of 3 things we must never forget. First, heroes are not statues in a park. They are the quiet men and women who walk among us, often carrying the heaviest burdens in silence. Our job is not just to build monuments for them, but to build a place for them at our table. Second, justice is not a verdict from a judge. It is an action from a neighbor. It's the choice to see the person, not the problem. It's the courage to look deeper and ask, "What is your story?" And third, and most importantly, a hero's true purpose is never finished. Samuel Johns didn't need charity. He needed a new mission. The greatest gift we can give our veterans is the chance to continue serving, to continue leading, and to continue being the angels this nation needs. 6 months later, you wouldn't find Samuel Johns sleeping in a doorway. You'd find him in the brightly lit gymnasium of a community center in the Bronx. He's on his knees, patiently showing a 16-year-old girl with a troubled past how to properly apply a tourniquet to a training dummy. His hands, once trembling and weathered, are now steady and sure. The haunted look in his eyes has been replaced by a quiet, focused light. He is no longer Doc Johns, the forgotten ghost. He is Mr. Johns, the teacher, the mentor, the founder. He has a home. He has his back pay and his pension. But more than that, he has what he lost the day his daughter died: a mission. He is once again the angel, not just of Alpha Company, but of a new generation. He is home. The story of Samuel Johns is a powerful reminder that one act of seeing, of truly recognizing the humanity in another, can start a ripple of change that can heal a man and challenge a nation. Thank you for joining us on NX Incredible Stories. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of truth, honor, and the enduring power of the human spirit. And in your own life, remember to look past the uniform, whatever state it's in, and see the hero within. Thank you for your service as a start, but welcome home is a promise we must all keep.